Harvest Moon 64. I struggle to find a more special and important N64 game out there for me. This game taught me a lot about game design and a lot about games in general and life. And it's, even to me now, a very special game. Now, the story of Harvest Moon 64 is a complete retread of the first game, actually. Your grandfather passes away, he hands you his ramshackle farm, and you have to try and build it up to be something of value. And after 3 years you get some sort of evaluation, but it really doesn't matter all that much. Which leads me to the gameplay and why this game was so important to me back in the day, and even to a degree now. This was the first Harvest Moon game I ever played. It was the first life sim style game I ever played. Just for a minute, put yourself in my shoes. Before playing this game, every game I had played was about either hitting something with a sword, or shooting something, or rescuing a princess from whatever monster has kidnapped her this time. But in this game, the moment you step into the world, it just says, boom, here you go. And that's it. There's no real predefined path as to what you're supposed to do. There's no real ultimate goal to the game. Sure, there's an evaluation, but it is largely pointless. It just opens up and says, wham, life. What you do with it, what it means or doesn't mean, whatever value you choose to find in your time here or don't. It's entirely up to how you perceive it. So one person might find a great deal of wealth in this game. They might find a game where they learn how to talk to people or experience friendships that they might not necessarily in real life, whereas another might find a boring thing that has no point. This game is a life sim, and in that respect I think it's a great analogy for life, just by virtue of the fact that there is both a great deal of meaning in it and none at all. Infinite amounts of possibilities for goals you can set for yourself, but that's something you have to pursue on your own. This game isn't going to hold your hand and say you need to do this. It's all a matter of you finding meaning in your time in this world, and there's something very simple and beautiful about that to me. And there was certainly nothing before this game that had ever really done this. And that, at the time, ultimately made me realize games can be more than simply about having fun and enjoyment. It could be an experience unto itself. I mean, as a kid who never had many friends or anything, making friends in this game, pursuing romance, and ultimately getting married, it was genuinely fascinating to me for me to experience all these things. I mean, yeah, sure, this game won't replace real people or anything, but, you know, it gave you a little bit more of an experience that I certainly hadn't had back in the day, and as a city kid, I had no experience with plants or farming or anything. And yet at the same time, after this game, I ended up growing a garden and working for many years in a greenhouse growing plants. And this game might ultimately have been the genesis of that shaping my life, which is kind of a big deal. And I get that I'm rambling and not really saying all that much about stuff you can actually do in this game, but at the same time, I think perspective on why this game is important to me is sort of required. I mean, I'm gushing about this for a reason, and I think it's important you know why. Now that said, it is Harvest Moon. You have no real open goal, and yet at the same time, everything you do is as important as you make it. Go talk to villagers, make friends, trade them crops, go buy stuff in the stores, grow greater plants, go feed cows and milk them. Or if you don't want to do any of that, just go to festivals, bet on horse races, go to a bar and get drunk. You can do that if you want, which is weird considering this is like an E-rated game, but still, this game just feels like a giant open world as to what you can do, and the only real limits on what you can do are the limitations you put on yourself. And I think in that regard it's a great analogy for life. But that said, comparing this to other Harvest Moon games, it is definitely, absolutely 100% behind the times. I mean, for one thing, there's just a lot of quality of life stuff that's just missing from this game. I mean, there's a shortcut to put stuff in your backpack, but there's no way to just take them out. There's also no way to cycle between stuff in your backpack or cycle between your tools, which means you always have to go through your clunky, very slow menu that lags the game and takes a few seconds to load up and to deload every single time. That's so incredibly frustrating. Villagers are programmed really ineptly compared to pretty much every game after this, because while they have their own sort of set schedules as to where they'll be at certain times, they're completely static. and they will be there until you leave the screen, then they'll just teleport away. Unlike every other game where you can actually watch them walking around and living their lives. And this game was rushed out the door to be released, which makes it buggier than Scorponok hanging out at a Radroach convention. I mean, there are just so many bugs in this game. For one thing, you can just go to a festival, bet on horses to win prizes, decline your bet, and it'll still go through without costing you any money. That's a little weird, but a less beneficial glitch is if you go to the mountains while it's raining and you try and chop wood, every time you swing your axe, you've got about a 10% chance of freezing your game. So, maybe don't do that. I mean, hell, there's more than one or two key items that do literally nothing, one of which actually has its effect given to another item that's given away by the same character. And in a lot of ways, this game is just lacking in content. For example, every season only has 2 different crops you can grow, at most. Fishing only has 3 different fish you can catch, small, medium, and I'll leave the third one up to your imagination. While you can ultimately go to the mines, first of all, you can only do it 2/3 of the way into winter, and even then it's just a giant dice roll whether you're going to get anything of value out of it. And even if you do, there's only like 4 or 5 things you can dig up. Oh yeah, and the entire first third of winter is literally pointless because there's nothing you can do until the mine opens up. While you can get house extensions, some of them are literally pointless, such as building yourself a giant deck that just takes up space. While you can collect recipes and stuff from other villagers, which is a really cool feature, and while you have a kitchen, and that's where you can put your recipes, you can't actually make them, which is just mind-bogglingly weird. And sure, while you can collect ingredients, sundry items, and even various products from your livestock, you can't process them and change them into anything else, like later games. There's so much content in here, but comparatively to now especially, it feels like it's only taking the first step towards fully realizing what it's trying to do. And maybe that's not necessarily this game's fault, maybe it was just trying to take one step further away from the original Harvest Moon, and in that regard it succeeds. But compared to its contemporaries, it's lacking, and when it's not lacking, it feels like it's only taking half a step towards putting in some effort. And honestly, I think the biggest issue is space on an N64 cartridge and sheer resources that went into developing it. And that's a damn shame, because what they do have is really addictively enjoyable. It still has that, oh, one more day and then my crops can be the next stage and I can ship them, and oh, I can give a gift to a friend, and you know, I can advance our little relationship and whatever. Every day has something new you can give yourself to do, and there's always something to get excited for the next day for, but at the same time, it feels like it could be more than what it is. One more thing I've got a big issue with, and my most recent playthrough ran into this problem, there's lots of stuff that is permanently missable. Case in point, my most recent playthrough, I actually was getting pretty close to getting 100% of everything, and my character randomly got sick on the final day of this 5-day event, and that was the one day I had to actually actively be doing something for this event to get the prize, and I just couldn't do anything with it. And because it auto-saves the night before, my entire save file was basically dead at that point, and that sucks. It sucks that there's one-time stuff that you can just easily miss. But to be fair, even Harvest Moon games today still sometimes do that, so I can give it at least a little bit of leeway in that regard. But still, this game is not without its problems. It really felt like they put a lot of time and effort into designing this game, but they just did not have the time to QA test it. And part of the reason for that is it was shipped out very quickly to get onto shelves for holidays. But at the same time, this is hardly the first time Harvest Moon has been buggy. Not so subtle jab at Harvest Moon DS, the biggest, buggiest piece of crap ever. And yet, despite all of that, I have got to commend this game for what it is. You've got a bunch of different areas. You can go explore the mountains, you can go climb trees, you can go meet the harvest goddess, go talk to some sprites, meet a kappa, you can go hang out in the hot springs for reasons. This game feels like it's trying to give you so much of an experience, and while it is buggy, it's incredibly ambitious, and the fact it works half as well as it does still kind of amazes me, all the same. And in turn, As the second console Harvest Moon game, the third game in total, coming off the heels of the atrocious Harvest Moon GB, this game just comes across as amazing in terms of content and quality. Now, the overall presentation to Harvest Moon 64 is something of a mixed bag. Visually, it's quite nice. The characters are bright and creative and full of personality, so much so that they would actually reuse these characters in Harvest Moon Back to Nature, and Friends of Mineral Town, and more Friends of Mineral Town, and the aforementioned terrible, atrocious Harvest Moon DS. So they're good characters, and it feels like you can easily get attached to them just by how unique each and every one of them is. And it's really hard to come out of playing this game without finding a favorite or two. Audio-wise, the soundtrack is pretty good, but, and if you've played a Harvest Moon game before, you probably know what I'm gonna say, there's only like 4 songs you're gonna be hearing too often, because there's a song for each and every one of those seasons. And unfortunately, outside of going to town or like a festival or anything, those are pretty much the 4 songs you'll be hearing, more than anything else. Now that said, those are some fairly good songs, most of which are fairly ambient. I quite like the autumn theme though, it's quite upbeat and fast-paced, and it feels like just a song you could dance to. I quite like that song, but just the lack of variety kind of hurts it, I think. A little bit, anyway. Now if you want a copy of Harvest Moon 64, well, good luck. You're probably not gonna find it for cheaper than maybe $80, at least for an official cartridge. Similar to the original Harvest Moon and even later ones, it's pretty rare, pretty expensive, and for the price it typically commands versus the quality, I can't say it's worth it. For me personally, it's worth it beyond measure because it showed me how different games can be and how they can really become more than just games. They can become experiences. And because of that, there's a great deal of both nostalgia and just value I place in this game. So for me, it was absolutely worth the purchase, but for the amount of content you're getting, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. That said, and I'm just learning this now, apparently you can download it on the Virtual Console for the Wii U, which at this point would be cheaper just to buy a Wii U than buy an actual cartridge of Harvest Moon 64. And, I mean, I guess it would give you a reason to own a Wii U. Well, that and like the 2 good games it had, but still, it's really expensive for what you get. It's really good, just really pricey as well, and that's incredibly unfortunate because there's something truly special about this game. It might not be as good as, say, Harvest Moon Back to Nature or Friends of Mineral Town, but I would still rate this about as high, and maybe, yeah, that's nostalgia, but at the same time, there's something about this game that just feels special, you know? And that's why this will always have a welcome spot in my N64 cartridge slot, because Harvest Moon 64 is a very unique and special game for me. There's no real purpose or direction in this game, and like life, any purpose, direction, goal, or anything you want to work towards in this game, that's entirely up to you to find, and I think that's a very gutsy thing for a game developer to do, is to basically give someone an environment, just say, find your own meaning in this. But at the same time, something about that just seems kind of beautiful to me. And ultimately, it does feel like life. It's all about you finding value in this thing. It's all about you finding your path, your story, your value, your purpose in this world. Maybe I could not articulate that all that well when I was a kid, but something about it even then just struck me as, this is well and truly special. And even now, I'm having trouble really coming up with the words I want to say just to explain how different this game was and how unique and special it was, and how much it means to me that I got to play this back then and I got to play this now. This is well and truly a very unique game, and I'm very thankful I got to experience this. And I'm very thankful that I got to share this very special game with you.